If it's Thursday, billionaires Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy meet with Republicans on Capitol Hill to pitch their plans to drastically slash the size of the federal government and rein in spending. Plus, new evidence and intensifying manhunt as police release new photos of the person suspected of shooting and killing the UnitedHealthcare CEO yesterday in Midtown Manhattan. And NBC's exclusive reporting on a key part of the new Trump administration's mass deportation plan that includes potentially deporting migrants to countries that they didn't come from. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ali Vitale in Washington. As the president-elect's government efficiency team of Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy spent the day on Capitol Hill. Musk had one of his children in tow as the two entrepreneurs pitched lawmakers on their new Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, and its massive push for reforms and sweeping cuts to government spending and personnel. Now, to be clear, DOGE is not a new government agency. It has no statutory authority, but if its recommendations are able to win over enough members of Congress or the president himself, its work could make some serious waves in Washington. Musk and Ramaswamy have already laid out some ambitious goals for DOGE, like finding ways to cut $2 trillion from the federal budget, massive cuts for the federal workforce, and the elimination of independent agencies like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Republican senators emerged from their meetings with open minds, saying they're receptive to the initial ideas floated by Musk and Ramaswamy today.
I think there's a lot of excitement, and he's very knowledgeable and open to suggestions. He came to listen, and I came to listen, so it was a good session.
I think we're just exchanging ideas right now, and you've got a group of reform-minded people. So I'm excited about the opportunities that lie ahead.
This is the very beginning of a process that, if we do it right, will be ongoing. So now we're just talking about the art of the possible, kind of the metes and bounds of things that we can do quickly, things that will take a longer time, require enabling legislation. But it was a good discussion.
And on the House side, Speaker Mike Johnson appeared equally eager to work with the DOGE Commission.
This is a brainstorming session. It is the first, again, as I said, of a long series of meetings that will be held as we're laying the groundwork for the new year and the new Congress. And you're going to see a lot of change around here and in Washington and the way things are run.
But there's some serious skepticism surrounding DOGE's work. Will members of Congress be as positive about spending cuts if they impact their own districts? Is any major piece of legislation going to be able to get through this closely divided Congress? And there are serious conflict of interest issues at stake as well, as Elon Musk's companies rake in billions of dollars in federal contracts. But DOGE isn't just looking to Congress. My CNBC colleague Eamon Javers sat down with Vivek Ramaswamy yesterday, part of CNBC's CFO Council Summit, and Ramaswamy made it clear that he's hoping the president-elect will act on DOGE's recommendations if Congress doesn't listen.
I think that there is an environment where people who are in Congress now, including those who have been elected, but also many who have been fighting this fight for a long time, feel like now is the moment where they've been given the ability to do what they haven't really had the license to do in the past.
Until it comes to their district.
But that being said, I think that ignores what can be done through the executive branch already. The executive branch has no obligation to send out a payment if it is wasteful or if it is known to be fraudulent or has a reason to believe that there is error associated with that payment.
Joining me now, my colleague on Capitol Hill, Ryan Nobles, who's waiting outside of that House meeting, NBC's Garrett Hake covering all things Trump transition, and CNBC senior Washington correspondent Eamon Javers. Ryan, we'll start with you. This is the first time we've seen the DOGE Commission on the Hill. I know Republicans are bought in, but to what degree is this a one-sided effort? Because I know a handful of Democrats who are interested, too.
Yeah, well, the first answer to that question, Ali, is that this is a room in which Ramaswamy and Elon Musk are entertaining a brainstorming session, and there's not a single Democrat in that room, despite the fact that several Democrats have raised their hand and said that they'd like to be a part of these DOGE caucuses in both the House and the Senate, and some have even said that they'd wish that they'd gotten an invite to this meeting. So it's not off to a good start in terms of the bipartisan nature of all of this. But that doesn't mean that at some point along the way, they might try and include Democrats. And there are plenty of Democrats on Capitol Hill who agree with Republicans that federal spending is out of control and that there needs to be reform. But as what always happens when you get into a conversation about spending in Washington, everyone loves the idea of cutting spending. But then when you actually put those spending cuts next to actual real policy, then all of a sudden the conversation changes. For instance, yesterday, Bernie Sanders said he'd be all in favor of massive cuts to the Pentagon's budget. Well, there's probably a lot of Republicans in that room that probably don't feel the same way. So this is going to be an ongoing process. There's a lot of back and forth. There's optimism here. There's a lot of people who believe that this is a necessary thing, that Washington needs to have this kind of gut check every once in a while. And perhaps this is a positive effort. But they've got a lot of work to do before we see any sort of substantive reality emerge from this new commission.
Yeah, certainly that's right. In the conversations I was having this morning with senators, I heard very few specifics. But the other way that Washington works is that Congress holds the power of the purse. When I was out in the halls today, there were senators who seemed fine with the executive branch sort of taking the reins here and jumping into the government funding space. But does that start to change when this commission begins targeting some of these own lawmakers' pet projects in their districts as part of the larger efficiency effort?
Yeah, I think part of this is maybe a fundamental misunderstanding of how the federal budget works.
Right.
I just talked to Congressman Greg Steube of Florida, who he believes that a lot of these cuts can be done by just not spending existing money that's already been appropriated. I don't know if that gets you to $2 trillion in 1 year. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but my guess is that you really can't get to $2 trillion in cuts without taking a serious look at entitlement programs and a serious look at the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense makes up 18% of the federal budget. The Social Security Administration, 21% of the federal budget. If you're looking at $2 trillion in cuts in a $6 trillion budget, there's no possible way you can get to that number without getting into those two specific agencies themselves. Won't be enough just to get rid of funds that you believe are misappropriated. But to your point, Allie, there does seem to be a degree of acceptance from many rank and file Republicans that Trump can just cut whatever he wants and we'll just let it happen. And this is, again, another example of the ceding of authority by the legislative branch to the executive branch that we've seen slowly build up with both Republicans and Democrats over the past couple of presidential cycles. But the power of the purse is perhaps Congress's most important authority. And if they're willing to just cede that to the executive branch, well, that may be a difficult power to recoup later on. And the other point is that they just may not be able to do so constitutionally.
Yeah, and we'll get to Eamon in just one moment, who tried to count to $2 trillion when he was interviewing Ramaswamy. But Garrett, I'll go first to you. This commission isn't even an actual government agency. So do they have a plan on how to enforce their recommendations? And what even are those recommendations at this point?
Well, I think the word on the street is concepts of a plan,
right,
Allie,
sure,
the phrase
yeah.
we've all become familiar with here. I mean, no, look, the DOGE folks here are essentially outside consultants who will be brought into each of these agencies with their own ideas. But the actual levers of how this all works, as you and Ryan both know, is that Congress has to spend this money, and they're going to do so likely, at least for the foreseeable future, with CRs, continuing resolutions, which locks in the same amount of spending that they've done year after year. I mean, there's a reason why this kind of work hasn't been successful in the past. It's extremely challenging. And I think the other sort of basic data point to consider here is that Donald Trump has been president before for 4 years and showed effectively no real interest in stopping the kind of spending that they're talking about now. He wasn't interested in deficits. He wasn't particularly interested in curtailing the debt. And he didn't roll back spending. He just had different spending priorities. And so I think when I hear Mike Johnson talk about a long list of meetings and brainstorming sessions, I think what we may be seeing here is a bunch of Republican lawmakers who want to get caught trying to talk about the thing that Donald Trump and his self-described first buddy, Elon Musk, care a great deal about right now, but may not still have a lot of enthusiasm behind it once the appropriating process resumes in earnest next year.
Tell me you came up in the school of Chuck Todd without telling me by saying get caught trying there, Garrett, because that's something that Chuck often says. But really, are the optics more important than the outcome? Is it important for Trump to be able to go on the road and say the DOGE commission exists, even if it's not actually doing anything?
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible, and I think it gives two of his most vocal and kind of hard to place elsewhere in the federal government supporters in Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who both have a lot of influence and a lot of conflicts of interest, which would make it almost impossible for them to have a more traditional role, something to do and some way to direct their megaphones back at the issues that Trump and his base say they care a great deal about. But I think at the end of the day, cutting government spending is not in the top 5 things that Trump ran on and won on in 2024. And I don't expect this to be the kind of thing that has a lot of legs in the new year.
Garrett, Ryan, thank you both so much for joining. Ryan, keep your running shoes on. You got to run after Elon Musk, I'm sure. Eamon, you and I are now going to try to count to $2 trillion because the U.S. has a massive budget, but some of it is mandatory spending. Musk has said he wants to, again, get to this magic number of $2 trillion that we keep talking about. But when it comes to the budget cuts, how much can the DOGE Commission actually do?
Well, as you guys were just pointing out, they don't have any actual authority to do any of this. This is an outside, what you call a blue ribbon commission, and this has been tried before, most recently and maybe famously with the Simpson-Bowles Commission a decade or so ago. These things have failed in the past, and the reason is because once you present these recommendations to people up on Capitol Hill, they say, that's great, but we're not going to take those recommendations because we like the spending that we're doing. Or it gets caught up in a debate about how much do you need to do revenue raisers, that is tax increases, and how much do you need to do by cutting spending. Every dollar, as you guys have just been pointing out, every dollar that Washington spends has a recipient out there somewhere in the country or somewhere around the world who likes that dollar being spent, who doesn't think it's waste, fraud, and abuse, and who has a member of Congress that they can talk to about it.
And I want to get you on the conflicts of interest piece of this, too, because specifics at this point are minimal. But one example is a recently approved $6 billion loan to Rivian, which is an electric car maker. And that's also a direct competitor to Elon Musk's Tesla. Does that raise some alarm bells to you?
Yeah, I asked Vivek Ramaswamy about this yesterday. I tried to get him to give us a specific, just anything, a line item of any kind over $10 billion that he would cut, and he wouldn't offer a specific. I tried to get him to say what it is that Donald Trump has told him are his priorities for cutting spending. He wouldn't offer a specific there either. And then I asked him about these Elon Musk conflicts of interest. Through SpaceX, Elon Musk is an enormous government contractor himself with the Pentagon and with NASA. He gets a lot of federal contracts. What if he's deciding that the contracts for his competitors are waste, fraud, and abuse, but the contracts for his companies are not waste, fraud, and abuse? Here's what Vivek Ramaswamy had to say about that.
Anybody who's offering recommendations, you should always have a skeptical lens to look at what are their motivations for making that recommendation. I say that's the best advice I'd give the public always. Be skeptical when somebody's making a recommendation. That being said, apply that standard 360 degrees. What do we have today? You have regulators who are regularly joining the industry. Is that they regulated? Is that a conflict of interest when they were making that decision as a regulator? Absolutely.
So he's talking about sort of the Washington swamp there, right? The idea that regulators go back into industry after they write the rules for that industry. You've got generals at the Pentagon who send contracts out to companies and then go serve on the board of those companies. So a lot of this is cultural and built into Washington. They're going to attack all that, and we'll see whether they're successful. Yeah,
there is that revolving door that often happens in this town. But when we look at some of the companies that are going to have a stake in this, the pharmaceutical industry, the defense contractors, that's just naming a few. Are they on board with these changes? What impacts are the reforms going to have on them, even if they're on board or not?
Well, naturally, they're not on board. They may say a whole bunch of things about it, but basically they want federal money. And it's interesting because Ramaswamy himself is a former pharmaceutical executive, right? And I asked him specifically about that sector yesterday. Do you think the drug companies are getting too much money from, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security? And what he was talking about was, sort of programmatic failures in those operations. So he's not talking about, cutting benefits to individuals, but he may be talking about the U.S. government overspending on drug companies, and that would impact those pharma companies.
Color me shocked that those various stakeholders don't necessarily want to see the spending rolled back. Eamon, thank you, and a great interview. Yeah. We turn now to the breaking news out of New York City and new clues in the search for the gunman who shot and killed a healthcare CEO yesterday in Midtown Manhattan. The NYPD released these images of the person suspected of shooting UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. He was recorded by a surveillance camera at an Upper West Side hostel where police believe he was staying. A senior New York City law enforcement official also tells NBC News that shell casings found at the scene of the shooting had the words deny, defend, and depose written on them. Those words echo a phrase commonly used to describe how insurers avoid paying claims. Investigators believe this new evidence would suggest the gunman had a personal or ideological motive. The 50-year-old Thompson was shot and killed early yesterday morning outside the Hilton in Midtown Manhattan, where his company was holding its annual investor meeting. NBC News law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter joins me now. What do we know, Tom, about the suspected shooter's whereabouts before the shooting?
Yeah, I think that's really been one of the keys to this investigation, that timeline there, Allie. And the idea that they could try to start to piece back where this individual came from might help in figuring out who he is and then obviously figuring out where he might be right now as we sit and speak to you here from New York City and just 4 blocks away. The information is so far, that still image that you're looking at comes from surveillance video from a hostel on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And we know that, according to senior law enforcement officials briefed on the investigation, as well as eyewitnesses that recall the NYPD going to that facility last night. And apparently he'd been staying there. And what we're told is they're looking into whether or not he was staying there with a fake identification and using cash, which, of course, would make it difficult for now detectives to go back and figure out who this person was. If they used a credit card or an ID, they would be able to figure it out. But if they used a fake ID, that might be different. And so that's one of the challenges, continual challenges in this investigation. How long he's been there is a bit of a challenge as well, though I think they're coming closer to figuring out the timeline and when this person came into New York City. If they could do that, I think they could figure out a whole lot more.
What about the inscriptions on the shell casings? Are they giving investigators any clues here?
You know, not a ton, I think, until they either speak to this person or develop more about the motive. You know, the number one priority here, Allie, is identifying who this individual is and then be able to make an arrest. Once they do that, they'll continue to work on motive. Of course, it's going to be so important. But right now, they've got somebody who shot and killed somebody in broad daylight in the heart of New York City, and they want to make an arrest on that. So that's kind of the immediate focus. Motive and those type of questions they're going to get to here, hopefully, fairly soon in the course of their investigation.
Tom Winter, thank you for always staying on it. We'll continue watching this manhunt closely, and we'll bring you any major updates as we get them. Coming up, the race to take the reins of the Democratic Party is heating up. I'll talk to one of the candidates for DNC chair about his vision for the party that is still reeling from last month's election losses. And don't forget to tune in to Meet the Press this Sunday for Kristen Welker's exclusive one-on-one interview with President-elect Donald Trump. It's his first TV network interview since winning the election, and you won't want to miss it. We'll be right back with more Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Democrats are looking at a long and potentially arduous road ahead after last month's presidential election loss, as the party grapples with the fate and future of its identity and its leadership. Step one on that journey has already begun, the race to pick a new party chairman. The top announced candidates ahead of the February election are Minnesota Democratic Party Chair Ken Martin, Wisconsin Democratic Party Chair Ben Wickler, New York State Senator James Skoufis, and former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley. Joining me now to discuss his candidacy and vision for the Democratic Party is that last name, former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley. Governor, let's start at the beginning. Why do you want to run the Democratic Party, and why do you think you're the best person to do it?
Because I love my country. And right now, I think we all have to recognize that the Democratic Party is actually the only thing that stands between the republic we carry in our hearts and whether or not that republic is going to survive much longer. So we have to turn our party around. We have to change to win. We have to do it quickly. And I'm probably about the best operational turnaround leader in our party today. So that's why I'm offering my candidacy. I know we're up for this. Talking to people out here, I know they're up for this battle. So it's time to pick ourselves up off the mat and recover and defend the country we carry in our hearts.
You were elected mayor of Baltimore 25 years ago, governor of Maryland 18 years ago, ran for president in 2016. But there are a lot of Democrats out there who say the party needs new blood. So what would you say to folks who think you'd be just more of the same?
Well, we clearly need new blood. And you know what? We have a lot of great candidates all across the country who are running, winning elections, even though the top of the ticket was not, wasn't a help to them in a lot of the places where they were running. For the last year, I've was asked by President Biden to go turn around Social Security, which was in danger of heading into a customer service meltdown. He didn't ask me to go there because it was an easy job. He asked me to go there because it was a tough job and because I have the ability to turn around organizations fast. And that's what we need to do. I have the experience, and it's experience that my party has given to me. I have run for election and re-election, as you pointed out, and whenever I did, I always made sure the message was connected to the family's kitchen table economic realities. That's the most important place in our country. And the good news is this change we need to win is really a return to our true selves as a party. But it's going to require not only messaging that's connected to every family's economic reality, it's going to require an operational turnaround. And I have the ability to lead this party out of the darkness.
Well, can't solve a problem without defining a problem. So first, let's double back to what we just witnessed a few weeks ago. Kamala Harris was the first Democratic presidential nominee to lose the popular vote in 20 years. Why'd that happen?
I believe that we got distracted from the core economic fears, anxieties, and concerns of the people that we were offering ourselves as, the party to lead them. In other words, the other guy, Donald Trump, has a twisted talent for tapping into people's fears. I believe that we have to be the party that is actually the party of hope and that engages in the economic arguments. The most effective ad I saw Vice President Harris run, who was did a valiant and courageous job out there, thrust into this role in the short time that she had. But the most important ad was the ones that the consultants ran the least. And that was the ad that talked about the high cost of living, the prescription drugs, and what we were doing to reduce those prices, what we need to do to strengthen and secure Social Security and make it strong for years and years to come.
I take
These
the point.
are issues that concern people, and we didn't talk to them enough. Instead, we talked about defending democracy, which a lot of voters heard to mean defending the status quo, and we talked about reproductive freedom, which if we had people on that issue, we already had them, and there was a lot more people that needed to be persuaded for us to win.
Yeah, but when you talk about kitchen table issues, Harris did talk about, and I'm glad you point out these ads, the cost of elder care, child care, abortion access, which I hear what you're saying, but it is an economic issue. Economists were saying the U.S. economy was healthy, which is why Democrats were touting that. So I guess the larger question is, was the electorate just not listening? Where was the breakdown ultimately?
Well, then we have to do a dispassionate deep dive on how we communicated and where we communicated. First of all, to your point, I believe that those messages that she had were actually effective. I don't think we said those messages enough. I think instead we tried to remind people of what Donald Trump had done on January 6th when he sicked a violent cop-killing mob on our Capitol to disrupt the election count, when what they really wanted us to be talking with them about was the high cost of living, cost of housing, high cost of prescription drugs. So we did some of that. We didn't do enough of that, according to the people I've talked to now from all over the country. The other thing that we failed to do, as well as the Republican Party, was we failed to engage online and through the channels and the places where people get their news on social media and from trusted networks and other sources of information. So we need to be better. We had a good ground game, but our Air Force game didn't talk enough about economic issues, according to the people I've spoken to here. And also, we did not have the online game that we should have. In other words, we were knocking on doors in an enormous amount of places with great volunteers. We had a great ground game. But Donald Trump had already been inside those homes through social media channels for months and months. We need to up our game on that score.
Could all of this have been avoided or potentially a different outcome happened if Biden had just chosen at an earlier point not to run again?
Yeah, that's kind of a D.C. parlor game. And I am, look,
but
I'm not running.
But it's a fair question when this is the person at the top of the ticket for voters.
Yeah, it's a totally fair question, but I'm not going to answer it. I mean, I'm here to talk about the future, and I'm leading my party out of this darkness into the future. We can play D.C. parlor games about rolling back the clock and what if. And you know what? None of that matters. The only thing that matters is turning this party around right away, getting it battle ready so that a government of, by, and for the people does not perish from this map. And that's what we're about. That's what the Democratic Party is about. And we're also the party that's going to be seen in a very short order to be the party that's fighting for working people, because the things that Donald Trump is going to do in rapid succession is going to break a lot of stuff and drive up the costs of a lot of stuff. If people thought the price of eggs was bad, wait till they see what the next 2 years has in store for hardworking people trying to get by.
Well, if you become the next DNC chair, you will be in charge of the upcoming 2028 primary process. I can't even believe we're talking about that, but here we are. It's early. What does that process look like to you? What kind of environment do you want to foster? And even the order of the calendar. Should South Carolina stay first?
Yeah, well, that'll be a process that the DNC will have to determine in an open and transparent way. When you talk about 2028 and the next crop of candidates, their success is going to depend on our having a 57-state strategy that rebuilds everywhere, gets people filing for office, recruits candidates in school boards, state houses, and the like. And when it comes time for the presidential campaign and our primary, I think we're going to have a great group of men and women competing. And if I am the DNC chair, I am committed to making sure they all get equal time on that debate stage, that everybody gets a fair shot and a fair chance. And when we have that primary, we're going to come roaring out behind a winner that's going to lead us into many years of better years than this dark time we're in for right now.
I do think that you're right, Governor O'Malley. You're going to have a very large field to contend with if this is your job come 2028. Former Governor Martin O'Malley, thank you for spending some time with us.
Thank you, Allie.
Up next, Pete Hegseth is spending another day on the Hill answering questions from senators and reporters as he insists he's not backing down from his uphill fight to become defense secretary. We'll be back with more Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Despite NBC's reporting that at least 6 Republican senators are not comfortable supporting Pete Hegseth as President Trump's pick to be Department of Defense Secretary, Hegseth was back on the Hill today for more meetings, and he told NBC's Garrett Haake he's not backing down.
This is how the process works. It's not going to be tried out here. It's going to be discussed inside the offices, how we rebuild our military, put the warfighters first. That's what President Trump has asked me to do, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Are there any circumstances where you would withdraw from this process?
I'm here with the support of President Donald Trump. As long as he supports me, which he told me this morning, I'll be here.
Joining me now on set is Tia Mitchell, Washington bureau chief for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, former New York Democratic Congressman Joe Crowley, and Jim Garrity, senior political correspondent for the National Review. Tia, let's start with you because I want to play for you some sound of Senator Joni Ernst saying anything but "I'm supporting Pete Hegseth" this morning on Fox News. Watch.
Will you support his nomination?
Well, I did have a very long, lengthy discussion with Pete yesterday, and I do appreciate his service to the nation. I also am a combat veteran. So we talked about a number of those issues, and we will continue with the vetting process. I think that that is incredibly important. So again, all I'm saying is we had a very frank and productive discussion. I think for a number of our senators, they want to make sure that any allegations have been cleared, and that's why we have to have a very thorough vetting process.
Frank, thorough, productive discussions, but not, I'm supporting him now.
Yeah, but I mean, also, she didn't close the door completely. So it's like, so you're saying there's still a chance. And I think that's what Trump is banking on, that these Republicans who have so many concerns, not just about Pete Hegseth, but about other nominees, are still willing to find a way to let Trump pick his team. Now, I think she's not there yet, clearly, but she's still open to it. I think she's trying to get there. The question is there anything he can do to get her there?
Yeah, many of these senators who are skeptical are saying they are trying to find a way to get there. But when one of the explanations that Hegseth is apparently giving in the room is, okay, I hear the allegations about drinking and I just won't drink if I'm defense secretary, what does that tell you about how this is going?
That is going to have the exact opposite effect.
Seems to be,
I swear, I'm not going to have a single drop of, because if I have any, I'm going to turn into a mess. That is really the opposite. Here's like, I think it's going to probably go to hearings. It'll depend on how he does in the hearings. If Hegseth comes across as in command, he knows his stuff, he knows exactly how he wants to reform the Pentagon, that'll probably reassure Republican senators, and who knows, maybe even a Democrat or two. I wouldn't count on that, but we'll see how things go.
I was going to say, do you think that any of this reassures a Democrat or two? I've yet to meet them, if so.
Yeah, as of right now, I mean, I think Democrats are in one place, Republicans are in another.
Yeah.
There's a real emphasis on Republicans to please the president right now. Democrats don't really have that liability.
Right.
And what I really see right now is Hegseth is being perceived less as a leader and more as a liability heading forward. You know, what happened in terms of Gates and getting past that, it never got really past first base.
Right.
Here you may get to third base, and whether or not he can actually get home is the question. And it really, I think, what does this say in terms of the other nominees? Is this going to be the sacrifice that we made that others will have an easier path? I think that's the question people may have now.
That's one school of thought, and yet I do think, and I wonder if y'all agree, as we get deeper into this process, as people start tuning in on the concerns, for example, around Tulsi Gabbard, does the process start to change, Jim?
One of them has to be the lightning rod. I also think it did not help Hegseth yesterday. The report of possibly Ron DeSantis stepping in as a replacement. Joni Ernst, not only would she get confirmed easily, they probably could establish a drive-through window. Look, senators like Bill Haggerty. Senators like senators.
Yes.
Either they really think highly of them from working together and say, hey, go ahead and go into the cabinet, or they can't stand them and they're ready to get rid of them. Either way, they're very likely to vote to confirm.
Yeah, senators also like President-elect Donald Trump, though, because listen to how Senator Tommy Tuberville said it earlier today on Capitol Hill.
Who are we to say that we're a better vetter and picker of people than Donald Trump?
But isn't that you're advising consent? That's your job.
Advising consent. But that's more the Democrats. I just can't believe we even have people on our side that are saying, well, I've got to look at this, got to look at that. What they're doing is they're throwing rocks at Donald Trump. They're not throwing them at Pete Hegseth. They're throwing them at Donald Trump because they're saying, well, we don't believe you did the right vetting and we don't believe he can do the job. Wait a minute. That's not our job to do that. That's the Democrats.
You listen to that clip and you almost have to remind people Congress is a co-equal branch of government.
Yeah, and there are decades, centuries of norms in how our governments run. There are governing documents that outline the different roles of the different branches of government. But more so, I think, quite frankly, just some of the facts don't bear that out. You know, when the sheriff in Hillsborough County said he no longer wanted to serve in Trump's administration, even Trump said, I didn't even know much about the guy before I put his name up. So that's not lending a lot of confidence that he has vetted all these people. So I think that's giving not just Democrats, but many Republicans. We just heard from Joni Ernst, who said that is part of our role. It has always been part of their role to, again, advise and consent and confirm top White House officials. That did not just start with Donald Trump.
No, absolutely not.
And it's why the founders gave them 6-year terms.
Right.
The notion that they'd be free and statesmanlike. And maybe they need 12-year terms. I don't know what the answer is here at this point.
Just ensconcing senators further.
The notion idea that this is simply falls on the Democrats who don't have the votes to stop a nomination is completely false. They're equally. Democrats and Republicans have an equal responsibility to ensure that the people that they're confirming in these places have what it takes to do the job and to do it well and credibly. And I think that Hegseth has some real big questions here as whether he can do that.
But this is also one of the things that we're trying to parse out in real time here is it's a Congress that has less instinct to buck Donald Trump now because any of the skeptics are gone, and yet you still have senators who are willing to just be independent-minded.
Yeah, there is such a thing as a bridge too far, as Gates had demonstrated. When I hear Tommy Tuberville saying, who are we to second-guess the judgment of Donald Trump, that sounds like the role for someone in the executive branch. And now that I think about it, why not have Tuberville be Secretary of Defense? He has been a defensive coordinator. So.
Oh, my goodness. Tia, I think on the Democratic side of this, too, yes, we're watching how they react to nominees like this, but they're also trying to chart a path forward for their party. I just had one of the men who wants to be the next DNC chair on in Martin O'Malley. What did you think of his pitch to change the party in the way that it does business right now?
Yeah, I think the Democrats have so much inner turmoil about who they are and how they communicate who they are in a way that's effective and how they communicate communicate in this new media society, you know, this new media landscape that's not the way it looked even 10 years ago. So I think he represents an outlook. I think it's so interesting that what is being left kind of unsaid when you read between the lines is the thought of identity within Democratic politics and what the leader of the party should look like from a literal standpoint.
Yeah.
And but that also speaks volumes about, again, this wider discussion of what the party stands for and how it's perceived in the general population.
And then I also think, Joe, that there is a discussion of the lasting legacy that President Biden is going to leave here, as we're seeing this discussion from inside the White House on the possibility of preemptive and broad pardons to folks that might be on Trump's so-called list. How do you take that as an idea being even just floated?
Well, before I address that, I think it's also important to notice that all four of the leading candidates for DNC chairman are white males.
Yeah, that is that point.
I'm going to be more direct about it. And so it's going to be very interesting. But, you know, maybe at this point in time, we need to be hearing from, you know, other sectors that maybe felt left out, maybe perceived to have been left out. They really weren't, but being perceived of it. In terms of the pardons, I think the uniqueness of this is the president's language himself.
Yeah.
A president-elect, I should say. In terms of what he has said in terms of threatening people like Liz Cheney with prosecution before a military tribunal of all things, which is crazy. And other Democrats as well, or maybe even other Republicans who didn't agree with him. So I think that's in lies where this really is at. And that's why I think the president's thinking about this.
Jim, Joe, Tia, thank you all so much for joining. I could talk about all of this forever. But coming up after the break, Ukraine's former president weighs in on the fate of his country and whether a truce with Russia could be on the negotiating table when Trump takes office in just a few weeks. We'll be back with more Meet the Press now. Welcome back. With the future of U.S. support for Ukraine in question under a second Trump administration, the Wall Street Journal reports that Ukrainian officials are already holding high-level talks with the Trump team. It comes as the winter cold could stall fighting on the front lines and as Russia once again carries out strikes on Ukraine's energy grid. Yesterday, I spoke with the former president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, who was the country's fifth president. I began by asking him for his assessment of where things stand on the ground in Ukraine today.
Ukraine paid during this aggression more than 100,000 people, innocent, civilian, killed by Russian missiles and by Russian attack drones and on the battlefield. By the way, this is not only Russian missiles. 40% of the missiles we receive in October, November, that was North Korean missiles. So North Korea is actively participated in the war, killing Ukrainian. And more than 50% of the attack drone is Iranian one. And that means that Iran is actively participated in this war, killing Ukrainian. And Ukraine surprised the world, stopping the second biggest army in the world and protecting our freedom, protecting our democracy, but not only ours. We're protecting the whole free and democratic world. And with this situation, they destroying our energy infrastructure, they destroying our educational institution, medical institution, and every single night I hear the blast of the missiles, I hear the motor noise of the attacking drone, and every single day or night, our air defense is working, trying to protect us. But this is the war of Russia, Iran, North Korea against free democratic world, including, as Putin said, this is the war against US. This is a war against NATO. This is a war against European Union.
I think the way you frame it on a global scale is really important, especially at this moment in Washington, where we've seen Republican support for this war start to wane. We've seen the way that President-elect Trump talks about this conflict. How do you convince someone like Donald Trump that Ukraine winning is also in the U.S.'s best interest?
Undoubtedly. And I think that Elected President Trump is a man of action, as a man of deal. And I have, as a president of Ukraine, 3 years of very effective cooperation with the President Trump. That was the President Trump who first gave us the lethal weapons, including the Stinger missile and Javelin missile. And because of this missile and bravery of Ukrainian soldiers, we stopped Russian troops in the February, March, and April year 2022. And after that, we are very much proud that that was a President Trump who introduced the sanction against the company who building up Russian Nord Stream 2.
But this is also the President Trump who has spoken favorably of his relationship with Putin.
You should know the President Trump. And I absolutely confident that when you communicate with Trump, when you speak with the language of arguments, Trump is quite decisive. And when anybody just wanna demonstrate that we should find out a compromise with Putin, I try to explain you, or describe you this situation. Putin wanna kill me, and I wanna live. How to find out the compromise? That's why you cannot find out any nation in the world who wants peace more than we Ukrainians, because we're paying a high price. But count on President Trump and all the new team, transition team, which is very strong, by the way, including the Special Presidential Envoy, General Cullen. And I really think that they will find out an arguments and use this window of opportunity to find out the strong motivation to put Putin at the table negotiation. And for this scenario, Ukraine should be strong. Ukraine should be very well equipped. The unity of the whole world and the eternal unity in Ukraine should be impressive. Because the purpose of Putin, he don't need a Crimea or Donbass. He needs to capture all Ukraine. This is the first strategy. And second strategy, he needs to divide all Western world. That's why he is so active in Romania, in Austria, in Slovakia, in Slovenia. He tried to penetrate and influence the election in US. That's why we should stop Putin. And it would be cheaper, more efficient to stop him in Ukraine.
You mentioned General Keith Kellogg, who, of course, the former president, now president-elect, is bringing back into the orbit as a special envoy. But I want to read to you what Kellogg wrote in a policy paper earlier this year. He said, the United States would continue to arm Ukraine and strengthen its defenses to ensure Russia will make no further advances and will not attack again after a ceasefire or peace agreement. Future American military aid, however, will require Ukraine to participate in peace talks with Russia. So when you read that, when you hear that from Kellogg, are you worried that a Trump administration will withhold weapons as a way to force Ukraine to the negotiating table?
Look, this is absolutely not necessary to force Ukraine at the negotiation table. We are ready. We have several understanding of this situation, which me as a president of Ukraine described in the year 2014. First, non-compromise on the sovereignty and national identity of Ukraine. We never return back as a part of Russia. Second, no compromise on the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Third, no compromise on the armed forces of Ukraine and ability of Ukraine to protect our independence and our land and our soil and our people. Fourth, no compromise on sanction against Putin, and that would be sanction from the hell, tailor-made, which create a motivation for Putin to sit at the table of negotiation, to cut Putin's ability to finance the war. And fifth, full membership Ukraine in NATO and in the European Union. This is the dream and this is the promises, and at the end of the day, all Europe and the United States in particular is interesting to have Ukraine in NATO, because Ukraine now has one of the strongest armed forces on the continent, and we are the only who can stop Putin.
When you talk about the list of non-compromise, where is there room for compromise?
We are ready to have a peace, a sustainable security situation on the continent.
But it sounds like peace in return for nothing.
We are not trading by territory, but we should create a motivation for Putin to stop the war. At the end of the day, Putin also pay a very high price for the war. And Putin, I want to stop any mistake to think that Putin is stronger than he actually is. Putin do not have a reserve. Putin has a disastrous situation in the Russian economy. Putin has a 25% inflation. Disaster for the rate of exchange, disaster for the social standard. And that would be the using the very, unfortunately, narrow window of opportunity of the new presidential team to find out an arguments. Enough is enough.
My thanks to former President Poroshenko for his time. Coming up, exclusive new reporting on the incoming Trump administration's plan for mass deportations and what could happen if some countries refuse to take people back. That's up next on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As a presidential candidate, Trump repeatedly vowed to carry out the largest deportation effort in American history. And after the election, he told Kristen Welker that his new administration would have, in his words, no choice but to carry out that campaign promise of mass deportations. Today, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum told reporters she's looking for an agreement with the incoming administration to keep deportees from other countries from being sent to Mexico. It comes as NBC News has exclusive new reporting that the incoming administration plans to deport some migrants to countries other than their own if their home countries won't accept them. Three sources familiar with those plans tell NBC News that the countries include, but may not be limited to, Turks and Caicos, the Bahamas, Panama, and Grenada. A short time ago, however, the Prime Minister of the Bahamas rejected a proposal to fly deportees to the country, claiming it doesn't have the resources to accommodate that request. Joining us now, NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley. She broke that story and joins us now to break it down. So, Julia, are there legal questions about the Trump administration being able to deport migrants to countries other than their own?
Oh, yes. In fact,
I'm sure.
This same question was asked in the first Trump administration, but they didn't get all of the time to really see how this would flesh out. This is a policy they started in 2019 to Guatemala. They were sued. And of course, that policy really just sort of hung in limbo because COVID happened. Title 42 started on the border. They stopped doing that policy, but it's still an open question in court, something they didn't settle on. And I spoke to the lead lawyer at the ACLU who headed that 2019 lawsuit last night, and he said they could expect to see another lawsuit if they try this. But look, if these countries agree to it, they could start moving in that direction and just wait until the court stops them.
That's a big if, though, and I imagine those conversations are already happening between Trump officials and these other countries.
Yeah, you know, when I was looking at the language today, so the Prime Minister of the Bahamas was very clear about it. We do not have the resources. This is the end of the conversation. But, of course, confirming our reporting that they had been contacted about a plan like this.
Right.
Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico, in one of her daily press conferences, said, I want an agreement so that we don't need to take them back. She didn't say we will refuse to take them back. And Mexico's under a lot of pressure because, as you know, Trump is threatening them with a 25% increase on tariffs. There are a lot of carrots and sticks that Trump can use now, and he is much more willing to use that kind of pressure than we've seen from previous presidents.
But the Trump administration from 2017 through 2020 did something similar to this in Guatemala. How did that operation work?
Yeah, so that's the one that we didn't get to see in full force. But we knew the first person who was deported was a Honduran man who was sent to Guatemala. And as we understand it, he didn't even know where he was going. He didn't know if he was getting on a plane back to his home country, where he's going. It's not clear that they would give these migrants more of a heads up. What the plan is now and why they're depending on this more now than they did then is because since then, under the Biden administration, you've had so many more migrants come in from Venezuela and other countries that refuse to take their migrants back. So they're seeing this as one of their only options if they're going to get to these large numbers that they want to deport.
Being sent to an unknown place is scary. But is that part of the deterrent effort?
You know, that's interesting. I thought about that. They definitely think deportations overall will deter border migration. Yeah. And if you think about it, we're really not hearing a whole lot about what they're going to do on the border itself. Everything seems to be concentrated on deportation. So could they do this in a way to scare others from trying to cross? Yes. In combination with overall deportations? Yes. But I think this is part of this plan, as I'm understanding it from these same sources. They want to be able to go from arrest to deportation in 1 week. And if you're talking about countries who refuse to take them back, they have to find a place to send them. Now, should that be a place that these people may not be able to work, they may not be able to stay permanently, and they don't know the language, they don't know where they're going? You could argue probably not.
Yeah, and that could be a deterrent in and of itself. Julia Ainsley, thank you, as always, for your great reporting. And we'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. And don't forget, this Sunday on Meet the Press, Kristen Welker has that exclusive interview with President-elect Donald Trump. You won't want to miss it. But the news continues right now with Hallie Jackson.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.